Hello everybody. I'm today's host, Owen. And so let me first give a brief introduction to our lecturer today, Amy Tabb. She holds degrees from Swiss Royal College, Duke University, and Purdue University. She's a research agriculture engineer at the U.S. Department of Agricultural Research Service Laboratory in West Virginia. And there, she has been engaged in creating systems for automation and in the tree fruit industry. His research interests are within the fields of computer vision and robotics, in particular robust three-dimensional reconstruction and perception in outdoor conditions. Today, Dr. Amy will discuss some work she has done on reconstructing a range of objects from leaflet trees with a robot camera system to individual fruits with a tabletop system. Let's welcome her.
All right. Thanks very much, Bowen.
Okay. Yes, okay. So you can start now.
Okay. Thanks so much for inviting me. So yes, I'm going to talk about reconstruction today, and I altered my title a little bit to include that this is in the agricultural context. So first, I'm going to introduce where I work a little bit. So it has a long acronym. The USDA is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. ARS is the Agricultural Research Service, or the agency, and AFRS is the Appalachian Fruit Research Station. So it's in a rural area in West Virginia. It's about 4 hours southeast of Pittsburgh. And this is an overhead view from a drone. So one of the great things about this location is that we have a research orchard connected to the laboratory, which you can see here in the trees. So when we want to do experiments, we just go to our blocks in the orchard and then come back to the lab. So it's very efficient that way. So I've noticed that a lot of people have like a certain way that they like to work on problems, and I'm also am that way. So I have a research personality that I'll explain here. So first is that I really dislike parameter tuning. So I'll tend to create methods that have a very few parameters or that compute their own parameters. And then another characteristic is that in agricultural work, it's seasonal. So I really like having the equipment ready to go and fully tested, because sometimes we only have a couple days to get the data before that window is gone for the entire year. And so because of that, I really dislike programming in uncomfortable environments, like in the middle of a cold field when you have 4 people standing around who had planned to help you, but instead they're just watching you. So because of that, I've tended to work on create systems and methods that work pretty well without anyone intervening. And even though our objects or scenes can be unpredictable or not what we expected. So here's an example of that. This location is in New York, and it's upstate New York. So it's cold, but it's also sort of swampy, and the ground was soft in this dirt area near the trees. So as we were driving along, getting images of the trees, the truck kept on sinking. And eventually it got stuck, and then we had to pull it out with another vehicle. So that's one example of like how what working in field conditions in agriculture can be like. And sometimes it's software and hardware, but sometimes it's just getting stuck in the mud. So today I'm going to talk to you about 2 projects as it was expressed in the abstract. The first one is originally it was on apple pruning. So first I'm going to talk to you about what's the agricultural problem and why do you want to do it. And then describe the system that we generated for pruning. And then talk in detail about one of the algorithms, the reconstruction one. And then results, and talk about some other applications. And throughout that, I'm going to talk about some failures or some things that I tried and didn't work out very well, and also how the work was packaged into modules so that I could publish as I went along. So this was a long-term project, and it was a really hard problem, but in a research scientist position, you have to publish what you're doing. So this is a picture of me. I'm almost 6 feet tall with apple trees. And so this is what they look like when they're close to harvest time. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why you want to prune, how you do it, and when you do it. So first of all, the why. In fruit trees, they have two main impulses for growth. One is vegetative growth, which is represented by leaves and branches, or what we call it the woody growth. And the other part of growth is represented by the fruit, the reproductive growth. So ideally, those two growth impulses are in balance. And we want them in balance to get optimal fruit production. And by optimal, I mean fruit that you can sell with high quality, and also a large number of high quality fruit that consumers will like. So that means that they have good flavor and that they are well colored. So if that relationship gets unbalanced, so say the vegetative growth goes crazy and you get what looks like a big shrubbery, then the reproductive growth will suffer and you'll get small fruit or not very many. So for fruit producers, their business is to produce fruit. So if you don't have much of a crop, that's bad. And on the opposite side, if you get too much reproductive growth, but not enough vegetative growth, then that can deplete the tree's nutrients. So it's similar to an elite athlete who doesn't have an adequate nutrition program. They're eventually going to crash. So in the terms of the tree, it may not die this year, it may die in a future year, but the tree is not going to do very well over time. So pruning is done in the winter, so the trees are leafless. And because it's done during winter in an uncomfortable time, labor availability is an issue. So this is skilled labor, and you have to arrange the crews to get there at certain times for certain blocks of trees. So I'll describe how you do the dormant pruning in a short amount of time. So this is a tree with a background. And first you need to identify the central leader or the trunk. And sometimes there could be more than one candidate. So you just need to pick one. And then find the branch with the greatest diameter. So diameter is measured at the intersection point of the trunk and the branch. And then you remove that branch. And this is a greedy algorithm. So then you find the next greatest diameter branch and remove it, and so on until you hit a stopping criterion. So there are a couple of different stopping criteria. Some are pretty simple, like you only remove 2 branches per tree. Some are that you stop when you hit a certain ratio of branch diameter to trunk diameter. So when I first started thinking about this problem, about working on pruning, my first thought was that, well, I have to reconstruct the tree structure. And to do that, I thought I could use structure for motion. And then it got like sort of hazy. But then finally I thought, well, once I have some kind of reconstruction, then I can identify the branches. So I'm going to describe how that went. So remember, this was more than a decade ago. So structure for motion in 2009, imagine it. And so I was using SIFT features, and I was getting very few features from SIFT. And the reason was that the tree shape is really, really thin and doesn't have a lot of texture, and then the branches cross. So SIFT wasn't working very well. In instruction for motion, you don't start with camera calibration. You compute it as part of structure for motion, and you need features to compute the camera calibration, which I was not getting because the tree shape is thin. So this was like a circle of despair. It really wasn't working at all. So besides all that, other constraints were that we could only get images from one side because there's a permanent trellis in with trees. And we're going to be acquiring images outside. So I knew that there would always be error in, like the plants are going to be moving, the equipment's going to be vibrating, and there's going to be illumination changes. So after that period, I thought about a new method. And so the assumption is, okay, the tree shape is thin and that the canopy is sort of sparse, so you can see through it. And then use a background in the scene so that you could compute silhouettes, maybe with some error. And then use calibrated cameras instead of trying to compute the calibration from the scene, again with some error, maybe with some error. And then by linking all those items together, maybe 3D reconstruction would be possible. So that was the new way forward. So first of all, with the calibrated cameras, I use this this wall of cameras in the lab. I had a mixture of cameras. I think I had Sony industrial cameras, and then I had some web cameras, so they were USB, and so that worked okay. And then I calibrated them all to a common coordinate frame. But the way in which it did not work well was that if I needed to change any camera to get different views, then I had to recalibrate everything. And then I knew that eventually I would want to go out in the field, and working on the hardware of these 40 cameras together was didn't work well in the lab. So I'm sure that wasn't going to work well on a machine. And I knew that the machine would be vibrating. So we had this industrial robot arm, and then I had the idea to use a camera on the robot arm to get images, and then I would be able to adjust where I was getting images from, and then solve this problem of every time you change the location of the camera, you have to recalibrate everything. So, but first you need to calibrate using a robot camera calibration method. So I looked into what was available, and so I used the Robot World hand-eye calibration formulation, which is the AX equals ZB1. So in this problem, the A transformations are what you get from camera calibration. So you have a pattern in the scene to calibrate, and so this is the A transformation from the world to the camera. And then the B transformations are from the robot controller to the end effector. So those are known. Both of these are known. And then what you want to find are the X and Z transformations. And then once you have those, then for any robot pose, which is the B, you can get a new camera pose just by rearranging and post multiplying. But what I noticed was that for the same sequence of poses, if I move the pattern just a little bit in the space, then I would get a really different calibration or a really different reconstruction. So looking ahead to going out in the field, I didn't want to worry about, well, is this actually a good calibration or not? I've already collected all this data. I don't want to have to go out again and collect another 60 trees worth of data just because my calibration was bad. So then I worked on this calibration problem using reprojection error, which is really similar to the way camera calibration was done by Zhang back in 2001. But it accounts for multiple cameras or eyes in this robot camera calibration problem. And so the code for that is been online for a while. So this is the overview of the system. Is first we acquire with a robot with 2 cameras here on the end effector, and then get images. And from those images, segment to get the silhouettes, and then reconstruct, extract the structure with the curve skeletonization method, and then compute measurements, which is the goal. Before all that, though, we perform a calibration. So this is the platform we have for the field. It's a self-propelled platform, and we have a lift and a slide here to experiment with different locations of the robot in the field for getting images. And the driver sits up here. This is what an early version of that machine looked like in the field with the blue background. Well, one of the early versions of the blue background. So you can see these are the trees with this is the wire of the trellis, and the robot gets images from one side. So I'll show the robot moving here. So this is another version. This is our smaller unit for phenotyping. And so it has the two cameras and the end effector, just like the larger version. And so it runs a sequence of positions and acquires images at each stop. So each sequence takes about a minute and a half to acquire. It's almost done. So then the reconstruction method, I used a voxel-based method of dividing the three-dimensional space into cubes. So it's a pretty big space. I gave some indications of the space. So it'll be about 2 meters in width and 4.5 meters in height, and probably about 1.5 meters in depth. So one of the negative aspects of using voxels in a large space, if you have small features, is that you're going to have a really, really big number of voxels. And I'll talk about how I dealt with that in a couple slides. So using silhouettes for reconstruction, here are some of the silhouettes. And you'll notice that because we have to be close to the row, these none of these contain a whole tree in any one of the images. So these are, so the image data is P or pixel, and the reconstruction is this voxel, this volume of voxels. And so this is can be thought of, the reconstruction problem can be thought of, I want to find the labeling of a Boolean vector X. So if you want to know if the voxels are occupied or empty. And so that problem can be formulated as a minimization problem of the pixels and this X, which is unknown. So the pixels are known and the X is unknown. So in more detail, so remember that the labels are Boolean. So, and this is one of the pixels, P sub I. So you back project the pixel from the camera into the three-dimensional space, and it intersects with some voxels, a set of voxels. And then and then you can create a function with the labels of those voxels and create a cost function. So if we flip the meaning of occupied and empty in the usual, so usually occupied is 1 and empty is 0. But if we flip them to be empty is 1 and occupied is 0, then this function works out. That this is the error of the mismatch between the labeling in the voxels versus the pixels. So this is the cost function for 1 pixel. So what we do is we sum the cost function for 1 pixel, we sum that up for all the pixels to create a really big cost function. And then those problems are called pseudo-Boolean optimization problems. And in the 2000s, there's a lot of work in computer vision on pseudo-Boolean optimization problems. They're called sometimes energy minimization. There's a lot of work on graph cuts. And some of those are problems are in the class P, but this one is not. So it's an MP. So I used an approximate solution instead of optimal solution. Okay, so now dealing with the runtime issue. So the features are really small, but the search space is really big. So first I use big voxels and then divided, and only searched around where the voxels had been labeled occupied. So by doing that, I was able to reduce the number of voxels searched. So this is showing how a search progresses as the voxels are divided. And so in the end, a very small percentage of voxels are tested over the total number in that for that volume. Okay, so then the next stage was curve skeletonization, which I used to recover the branching structure so that finally we could take measurements on this tree. So my surfaces tended to have were noisy. So first of all, they were sort of sparse compared to graphics models. And then there's some errors up here at the top, particularly if there are errors in the silhouettes or some error in the, if there was some vibrations or things like that. So when I looked at state-of-the-art methods for curve skeletonization and graphics, I noticed that their models look really, really nice. These are some of the models from graphics. So in the end, the current state-of-the-art in graphics didn't work for my surfaces. It's like the problems I wanted to solve were not the problems that the existing literature wanted to solve. So I ended up working on curve skeletonization for noisy surfaces. And so here's one of the results for this particular tree. And then this is the extracted branching structure. And it works pretty well for these nicely behaved surfaces as well. So here are results for that project. So on the left is an image of the tree, in the middle is the reconstruction, and on the right is the curve skeleton. And this was for the phenotyping work. So we used a background on the ground too, because some of those trees were sort of growing sort of horizontally. But for the production work, we don't use a background on the ground. So there's some, you might see some errors that are in the background, which is from the segmentation error, original segmentation error. And as it rotates around, you'll notice some artifacts as well from getting data from only one side, from the reconstruction, I mean. So it looks sort of like a knife, like it's really thin from one area and sort of thicker from another. And then we had to, then we wanted to determine, well, how accurate is this system for the kinds of things that people, characteristics that people use for pruning. So we measured diameter, the length of branches, and the angle of the branch from the main trunk on a couple trees. And the results were pretty good for diameter. So the root mean square error was less than 3 millimeters, and less good for other items like length. So as the branch goes on and gets thinner and thinner and thinner, that branch will get truncated. And angle itself was sort of hard to measure to get the ground truth even on trees. So we weren't too surprised about the angle. The computational time was dominated by the reconstruction step. So whereas the other ones were quite fast. So it's still around 9 minutes on average to do the reconstruction. This is much, much too slow for a pruning task. So in agricultural automation, you want something that works really, really fast to be able to compete, to be viable for people to use in the field. And 9 minutes is not going to do the job per tree. But it may work for other applications. So going forward with this project, thoughts I've had were to, is it possible to remove the background or speed up that reconstruction step, and we've been thinking about other applications. And one of those applications is phenotyping. So one of my colleagues at the lab, he's has a population of trees with really different growth types. And for phenotyping, what they want from engineers is to measure the plants in a way that humans are not able to, or measure them more accurately or faster. So we were able to reconstruct these types of plants using the system that was developed for pruning. So that project on reconstructing trees is mostly completed. And then I guess a year later or so, then I started work on a different project, but it's at a much smaller scale. However, a lot of the things that I've done on this other project were inspired by the things that I learned on the first project. So I started working on this project because of Mitchell Feldman. So I met him at a conference on the last day. It was the last day, the last meal. So it was sort of funny, we may have never met unless we had been seated at the same table. And Mitchell had been working on phenotyping of the two-dimensional shape of fruit, and Mitchell is in plant sciences. So he was really interested in the genetic background of these populations of strawberry. But he recognized that there's a bias if you slice the fruit in to get the two-dimensional shape. And so he was interested in three-dimensional shape phenotyping. But he's in plant sciences, so he was hitting a wall on the computer vision part. And another thing about Mitchell is that he was in California, I was in West Virginia. So we came up with a project, and our question was that we wanted to estimate the fruit shape using a vision technique. And one of our constraints was that we wanted to create something that was really low cost and modular, so that we could use it and move it from one lab to another. And we needed to do it in a way such that we could work together. So he's in California, I'm in West Virginia. We needed to figure that out. And we were able to wrap this work all up and put it in a preprint lately. So the work, the reconstruction system is a tabletop system. And for the three main elements, you need to get a reconstruction. For the camera calibration step, we use a tool called Calico. And also we prepared the background so that we could extract the camera calibration information. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So that's solved. For the image-to-image correspondences, we use a silhouette-based technique again, so we can get those correspondences. And then from there, you combine those pieces of information, then you can get the three-dimensional reconstruction. And again, I used a shape from inconsistent silhouette technique like I did for the trees. So here's what that system looks like. There's a mini computer here that triggers a camera and a stepper motor. So the stepper motor will turn the spindle at the same time that the camera is acquiring. So on the spindle, there's some Hierarchical tags, and therefore the calibration part, and on top is the fruit. And the stepper motor will turn one full revolution of the spindle. So some things about this system is that it's pretty fast on data acquisition. And then when Mitchell was working with it, it took 30 seconds in total because of the write speed of the camera. And it was a low cost system, about $1,600 to put everything together. And then one thing we liked about it was that you could move it to different labs or put it outside on a table. So this is, if you're not aware of what other things are out there, this is in contrast to things like X-ray CT, which takes up a large room, or some other imaging boxes, which are quite big. And there are other designs possible. So this is just one of the designs. So for the camera calibration step, we have one camera, and we need to know what the camera poses are with respect to the spindle at for every image. So for that, we have these Charuku tags, and those serve as landmarks. So this is a structure for motion problem using the tags as landmarks. And so since we know the size of the tags, we can figure out what the calibration is up to scale. The background is used to refine the internal camera calibration parameters because it covers the whole image. And that's more details of that is in this preprint. So this is what that output looks like. So the cyan pyramids are the camera locations, and the crosses are the locations of the calibration patterns. So this right here, this calibration object, is just a 3D printed like 2 cubes that are offset, and then we taped the calibration patterns on them, so you don't need to know where the patterns are relative to each other. Okay, so here's some of the results of that work. We assessed it on quite a few different things. So potato, strawberry, pear, mini pepper, a grape, and another type of pear. And in general, the reconstructions look like what we would expect them to look like, when we looked at them with our eye. We had one failure case with the Anjou pear. So I'll talk about that, but in general, it seems to work pretty well. So the failure case is because we used a silhouette-based method, and the segmentation was worked pretty well for the full data set, except for this particular case. So we didn't tune it for each of the species. We just chose some general parameters that worked well for most of the data set in this preliminary paper. So something I didn't talk about with the trees is about, well, what shapes can you reconstruct with silhouettes? But there has been some, there was a lot of thought on this, like back in the 90s, on, well, which shapes can you reconstruct, and what are the results? So if you have an infinite number of views of the object and the perfect silhouettes, if the object has no concave surfaces, then you can reconstruct it with silhouettes. If it has concave surfaces, then you will not be able to reconstruct those regions. Okay, so given that, this type of shape you can reconstruct with silhouettes. This type of shape is a sphere, so yes, you can reconstruct it with silhouettes. This shape has some singular points and edges, and you can reconstruct this with silhouettes, if your silhouettes are perfect and you have many views of the object. But this object has concave surfaces and concave regions, and so those regions will not be reconstructed, and I will show you that in a little bit. So this one will not be fully reconstructed. So we knew that going in when we did this evaluation of the system. So this is the results with strawberry, and so strawberry we thought would be well reconstructed. So there's that one, and then this is a yellow pepper. And as it goes around, you might notice that there's no corresponding dimple on one side where there's a concavity. So there's the dimple right there. It's not in the reconstruction. So I mentioned that the qualitative results look pretty good, but we wanted to do some kind of evaluation to assess, well, how well does this method do? And so for that, we had this collection of ground truth objects, which from the previous slides, you already knew that one of them we know is not going to do very well with our method. And we printed out different sizes for each of the objects. And then we used ICP to register the reconstruction to the ground truth model and assess the difference between the two. So this is that strange F shape. And there's some segmentation error. So not all of the F shape is reconstructed, even though if the silhouettes and camera calibration were perfect, it should have been able to be reconstructed. Okay, so the difference between the error between the ground truth and reconstruction was less than or equal to 3 millimeters for the objects that we thought could be reconstructed, so the ones without concavities. So this is that object that has concavities. And so the concavities are just represented as these flat areas. And then the error for those objects with concavities, of course, is larger. So I wanted to acknowledge Scott Wolford, the technician who works with me on his work on these projects. And the take-home points are that new methods and systems really need to fit with the structures that are already in place, because it's a big ask to have existing structures that have been developed over decades to change. And that when you're working on agricultural problems, many methods that are established in computer vision are not going to work. So sometimes you have to create new methods that you didn't plan on working on. And something that's worked a lot for me is to eliminate ambiguities whenever possible. So I did not plan to work on camera calibration, but I have because it's helped me with the work, get further with the work. And I wanted to acknowledge funding agencies, and if you have questions outside the Q&A period, please contact me.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Amy. Very brilliant presentation. So let's come to the Q&A session. Maybe there are some questions. So the first question regarding your first project is that someone is asking, have you released a data set for the tree reconstruction and phenotyping problem, or do you plan to do that? This is the first question.
No, I haven't. And that was, some of that work was done like in 2014. So, I mean, some little parts of it have been released, but not all of it has been released. Yeah, I'd have to find it.
Okay, sure. So the second question is that, is there any ongoing work to tackle the concave objects problem?
You mean in general or from me?
Maybe general.
Well, I mean, people use stereo to deal with concave objects, but in terms of silhouettes, I don't think there is. So what people have used silhouettes for in the past is to get like an initial solution, and then they can refine that solution with photoconsistency. So, you know, to have their search space be smaller, they'll use silhouettes first, and then they can use graph cuts or something else to shrink that model down to deal with the concavities, but they'll use a photoconsistency term later. So that's probably my next step for this project on the fruit, actually.
Okay, and there comes a new question. The third question is, would better lighting have improved the missing sigmoidal portions? Yes.
For the, okay, for the, I guess for the fruit, right?
Yes, for fruit.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
So yeah, so this work is, the fruit work is pretty new, and we're just trying to present to the plant biology community, like without extensive tuning. If a plant biologist set this thing up in our lab, how would it perform? Not as a complete, product. But yes, there's a lot of optimizations that could be done.
Okay, sure. So maybe I have a question regarding your first project. I have a question is, what is the use of the curved skeleton for agriculture? I mean, if we have already constructed the reconstruct the 3D pose of a tree, and we can do the diameter measurement. Why should we still do the curved skeleton? What's the use?
Okay, so in the reconstruction gives you a bunch of occupied or not occupied voxel labels. So you need to determine what is a branch, like what voxels belong to different branches to measure branch diameters. You need to identify parts, like in the way that different tools identify the parts of a skeleton for like games.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks. The question is, has LiDAR imaging been explored for a possible approach to retrieving the models?
Yes. So there has been work from two groups on, well, no, at least one group on LiDAR, one group on RGBD. Yeah, so some of the problems with LiDAR with trees is that the trees are so thin that you end up missing the features that you're interested in. So you have to take a lot of scans. Yeah, the paper I'm thinking of, I think it was like 30 minutes to scan one tree, which for automation is not gonna work. And then the RGBD work, so like a Microsoft Connect, they had some problems with lighting. So when the lighting was too strong, the sensor doesn't work super well. And it was a resolution problem again. So I think that those sensors are continuing to come down in price, and the resolution's continuing to go up. So it may be that kind of thing will work better now. But like 2016 era, they still needed a lot of help to work well.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question. So, hello, Dr. Ami.
Hi.
So I was wondering, it's like, I guess most of the experiments were based on single reconstructions of fruits or trees. So I was wondering, have you tried reconstructing cluttered trees or like multiple objects at the same time? And like, what are the particular challenges in such like scenarios for agriculture environments?
I haven't done a lot on reconstructing multiple things at the same time, because mostly what the people I'm working with are interested in are like one sample, what are the characteristics of this one sample. But yeah, if they were interested in the aggregate characteristics of like multiple fruit, that would be interesting, but really hard. So in the tree setting, the big issue would be getting images across that large space. So people have used drones to fly in the rows, and it's hard because the trees go in, they're growing into the row, and so if you hit the tree with the drone, then you have a problem. So that means that you're piloting the drone, and so that tends to be the issue. One thing that works better is using a ground vehicle like these John Deere Gators. off-road vehicles, and you can put video cameras on those. Like I've used GoPros. That tends to work better. So yes, I guess I've done some work on flower detection of blocks of orchards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I have a question. What are like the most exciting directions that you see right now in computer vision with agricultural robotics and this plant phenotyping challenge that you're looking at? Like for people here on our talk that might be looking to jumpstart their own research, what do you think are exciting directions right now?
Well, definitely deep learning is so much more accessible and easier to get into than it was many years ago. And a lot of these problems are not easily solved with the classical methods. So people with energy or skill with annotation, like they have a lot that they can work on. And some of it is just getting linked up with some plant biologists who can express their problems because there are a lot of open problems out there in plant biology. So yeah, I guess the answer would be deep learning, accessibility, and hardware as well would be it at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So someone is asking you, do you think pairing the current cameras with other types, such as NDVI cameras, provides more accurate models?
Maybe. I mean, NDVI is a composite of NIR and RGB. So, so it's a pseudo color. And then you always have to register the cameras together, which is like another source of error. So it depends on the problem. For like stress detection, NIR can help, but it's really important to define what your problem is and